Dark Age involved the dispersion of Israel and losing the amalgamating Hebrew lingua franca and identity. And part of those things, really happened, especially in Northern Africa, where there was a high concentration of Hebrew scribes. And when the Ottoman Empire came in and pillaged and burned, most of the books in Timbuktu, which was one of the largest libraries, in the world at that time, and they burnt and pillaged and removed all Hebraic literature and left only the Islamic literature because they considered it a crusade. Now, because of that, because now when the scribes were sold into slavery, then there was no one now to teach the language or bring forth that language, because the wealth of the Hebrew nation had been sold into slavery in America and Britain and Saudi Arabia. So then what happened was an enslavement and then a colonization. So African Americans were enslaved and the Africans were colonized. So we experienced the same things, the same torture that African Americans went through, or the Sidis and Dravidians went through. We experienced it too, and so did the Aborigines as well. So the Hebrew, Iburu, Ivrit, Oburu, Eburu, Ibu, was considered extinct until the 19th century. Now, then what happened was, after we lost our identity, now people were taught Hebrew as an Edomite language, and basically, the descendants of Esau were staking their claim as the legitimate firstborns, because God said there's always going to be a war between the Jacobites and the Edomites, who were the descendants of Esau. So then, as a result, because now the coming out of mental slavery and mental distancing, when they represented Hebrew as a white inheritance, those who were the lost tribes would never have connected. But I argue that had we been taught that Hebrew language, had we been taught Christianity using the Hebrew language, people would have connected two and two together and found out that this is a Bayitu language. It's a Bayit language, a language of the people. It's a Bantu language. So now, also in so doing, even as I present this work in my research of what I've come up with the EKEGUSII language, I also, at the same time, I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone. So I'm bringing it forth also as a progenitor, a pre-Babel language. Or rather, it can shed light on what that pre-Babel language looked, before the other languages came into being, because I'm a believer of a pre-Babel universal language. I'm an ardent believer of that. So, well, according to Fox News and Live Science, the pre-Babel language is believed to have originated in East Africa. The Nimrodian sociopolitical ideology of universalism that brought on the curse of God, they brought on the dispersion and the dispersion of the unified language. So before the Hebrews were dispersed, physically, the language was first dispersed. Now, because they tried to build a tower to reach over to God, and God destroyed them, and He brought on confusion by bringing on many languages. Now, I do believe that if there was a pre-Babel language, God must have scattered it based on, phonetic conversion and the use of matrices. I do believe matrices are used, as well as various other combinations that I'm starting to come up with. I believe the pre-Babel proto-language was a Bantu Hebraic language. It has to be a Bantu Hebraic language. EKEGUSII and Swahili, I believe, are very important threads in weaving it together. Now, I'm also not a believer of Swahili being a modern language, that it was just spoken in the 10th century. I do believe that Swahili is probably as old as the Bible times, and I do believe that it was also an Edomite and Ishmaelite and Moabite, conspiracy to propagate Swahili as just a modern language, because Swahili has been very instrumental in this research. And even though they say it's from Bantu languages, it's an amalgamation. I wouldn't believe anything these people say. Sorry. Now, in the same breath, EKEGUSII being an East African Hebraic language, I argue that EKEGUSII spoken by the ABAGUSII is one of the progenitor contributors of the biblical lingua franca of the Torah. I have no doubt in my mind that EKEGUSII is one of the languages. I don't need anyone to assure me. I know that it was a language of the Torah. EKEGUSII is also one of the contributing languages in Progenitor, spoken in ancient Egypt. The Torah was first written in Progenitor, and that's where the concept of Torah comes from. I argue that EKEGUSII, spoken in Western Kenya, is one of the founding mother languages in relation to world languages. So, patching EKEGUSII to the Afro-Hebraic biblical language, or biblical lingua franca, might give insight to the universal pre-Babel proto-language. So I argue that the Hebrew language and Progenitor are Bantu languages. I have no doubt they're Bantu languages. They may have like some Asiatic words in them, but that does not make it Asiatic. They are Bantu languages. I argue that EKEGUSII is definitely a contributing language used in Progenitor. Now, the beauty of Progenitor is that it did not use like written letters of the alphabet, but more so it used images, which were hieroglyphs, and hieroglyphs don't really pay attention to the pronunciation, say, of the letter C. You know, it's like the word hamba and ramba and ramba and ama could be the same thing. It just depends on how you pronounce it. So the hieroglyph, So the hieroglyph actually put on an almost universal understanding of language among the Bantu people. And when I talk about Bantu, I mean, the whole conflated union of the language of melanated people. Now, I argue that learning the Torah or the Bible in English kills the creative component of understanding the Bible as an African or Afro-Asiatic language. It was evil genius, guys. So evil. Oh, I can't even explain. For example, the color red in Hebrew, would not be perceived as the color red now, as Westerners understand it. Even the concept of, wives being inherited in the Bible, like brothers inheriting wives, is a very, very African concept. The ABAGUSII still do it. If a husband dies, the brother can inherit, but that's a very biblical practice. But when I lived in America and I was immersed into this culture, I realized that it's not an American kind of thinking or British kind of thinking. They don't inherit wives. They don't do much of what the Bible practices are. So so Christianity cannot be of a white conception. I'm sorry. Therefore, anglicized names and expressions and white images created a geographical distancing and Hebraic alienation in the minds of the real Hebrews or the Hebrews. Now, I'm going to use phonetic conversions. Phonetic conversion would be, say, how the names, say, Salim and Salimu, would change. Sometimes you would gain a letter. Sometimes you gain a letter or you gain a few words at the end, based on how the word will be changed from different tribes and different accents. Or sometimes the merging of two consonants or agglutinations to make up words. And some people say that words easily lose but rarely gain sound. But to me, I feel there's no rule to the game. From my research, there's really no rule. You either gain, lose. There's really no rule.